Long before y'all. So, there is no advancement on the fact that one class is further along than the other. The men started 1 Corinthians back at the beginning of the school year. So we're only on chapter 12 now, or 11, somewhere in that neighborhood. And really send you off the edge. I've got some reprinted chapter 2, and then chapter 2, and then I've got chapter 3, which is probably fairly ambitious that we would get to chapter 3. But I have chapter 3 that we can pass out after the break. Go ahead and start looking at those. A couple of announcements. We have some handmade birthday cards, which are quite nice, that the people are, it's one of their talent projects for the Ukraine. If you would like to pick up some of these, they're in the back, behind Gene. And in a little basket, I think they're $5, is that right? $5. And so these are nice, if you'll take a look at that. Then no meeting next week because of spring break. That's correct, right? And then Wednesday, Jacob and Cynthia Baker will be with us. They were members of St. Paul, I think still are, but for a number of years, got involved just through some mission projects of St. Paul, and the next thing you know, I think he's a dentist or an eye doctor, relocated to Honduras, and pretty much that's what they do. They're sort of like a medical missionary to Honduras, and have started some ministries down there. They're going to be back with us Wednesday night. So
do you know yet when Grant Scarborough's coming?
Do not. We're hoping in April, Mayish time, and part of that is lining up Grant's schedule as well. We're going to finish Malachi. Dr. Baker, the reason why he's coming now and in between the studies is because he's only in the U.S. for a few weeks. And he was already, when he sent us word that he was coming, he had 2 weeks available. And so this one just seemed, this week, next week we're on spring break, a lot of folks are gone, and that's the day before they leave to go back. So we weren't about to do that type of torture to come, you know. But Grant, we're hoping comes April, Mayish time, early May more than anything else. I know a number of you talk to Richard Betts often, or at least maybe follow what's going on in his life via Facebook and whatnot. Richard's just having a real rough go of it, and he and I were talking this morning, and I want us to direct our prayers, not solely for him, but specifically to lift him up before we begin. And just, he's out at MD Anderson, and so I hope that you'll, if you haven't, I know he's been on our prayer list, but just make sure we remember him in prayer this morning.
Shane, has he started the radiation yet?
He had to finish, if he hadn't started this week, it's coming. The last communication I had with him this morning via text was, I'm in the hospital right now getting some treatment, but I think there's just a number of things that, he got a bad report a few weeks ago that was not just emotionally difficult, but physically the report was not good. And so now they're moving towards the radiation. I think he started it this week, but I'm not 100% sure. Some of what blood levels had to be up and things of that nature. But do remember Richard as well. There's a number of other folks inside of our larger community that are dealing with a number of health issues, and Richard definitely is one of them. Any other announcements that I'm missing? I told, I think I was talking to Beth, some Tuesday mornings, once a month or once every 6 weeks, I'm flying in fairly fast on a Tuesday because of some stuff at St. Francis Hospital. So if I seem scatterbrained, if you'll just give me about 15 minutes, I'm downloading one thing and I'm uploading something else. It'll start to reboot itself here by 15, 20 minutes into our study. So that'll give you some explanation that I haven't had 50 cups of coffee. It's just I'm
Only 45.
Let go of one and picking up something else. All right, any other announcements before we begin? All right, let's pray. Oh God, again, we gather in your name. We pray, Lord, that this time would be a number of things. One, we want it to be productive, not just for our lives or us as a group, but what study can do inside the heart and mind of a person so that the ripple effect is more than just knowledge or more than just reflection, that somehow in offering ourselves in the discipline of study, that there actually is transformation that takes place, even if it is to the smallest degree that we can't perceive, but you can, in hopes that when we leave here, somehow there is a better reflection of Christ in the world. That's ultimately what we hope when we study. We relish and enjoy the fellowship and the time together and the time of learning, but ultimately what we hope and pray is that from our witness, and in any shape or form or fashion it manifests itself in the world, that people get a glimpse of redemption, that people get a glimpse of your grace and mercy that is so freely given and never deserved or merited, but just an act of a good God who longs to be in relationship with creation, in hopes that even when we do all types of things that lead to destruction, that lead to hurt, that lead to brokenness, you still seek to save, and you still seek to redeem, and it is strictly an act of a gracious God. At the same time, of God, we do carry a number of burdens. There are people who are in this room that have burdens for loved ones, have burdens for themselves. Some grieving, some battling illnesses. We've mentioned one, Richard. We do pray for him as separated from community, being in Texas. If there's a way that even at MD Anderson there can be a community that is created to aid in this process, we definitely want to pray for that. We also want to pray for him in every sense of the word. Ultimately, what we hope is that through your loving acts of kindness and grace, you uphold and bring about a sense of wholeness. Any fears that are going on at this very moment, somehow speak through that your words of comfort, so that what is experienced is what we would call a peace that passes all understanding. We understand and rely that without you, that is impossible. That inside of us is not the ability to even begin to keep the storms at bay. But somehow, in a way that your Holy Spirit is able to do this, you, with your presence, have this calming effect that even in the face of things that look so difficult and so painful, there just is peace and there's assurance. And so do that again. We pray in the name of Christ. Amen. All right, 1 Corinthians chapter 2. My last memory of this is we made it through verse 5. Now, again, I'm open for if we need to recess back or if we need to, go forward. I'm open. But if not, we'll just recap up to verse 5 and then we'll begin at verse 6. Keep in mind that Paul has this argument that takes place on the end of chapter 1 that will run through the better part of chapter 4, where he's dealing with the different cliques or the different groups inside the Corinth church that are basically arguing over who is more spiritual. And there are all types of, there are people who are arguing in what is the basis of their spirituality. Some of them is, or some of them operate with an idea that they're more gifted than someone else. And so when we get to the latter part of this book, you'll see Paul deal very specifically around certain concepts of gifts. But there's a large group inside the church that are a powerful group, what we conclude, that are basically, I have this gift, and because I have this gift, I'm higher up the food chain than everybody else. So when it comes to leadership, when it comes to teaching or authority, I have it over someone else. And, so I should be the one to make the rules. Another one is over the concept of wisdom. Highly influenced from the Greek surrounding culture. Wisdom was really the main means by which someone had status, for lack of better words. I mean, now there are traditional means like, income or money, land, things of that nature, but wisdom was highly valued in the Greek culture. And, people who were the equivalent of professors would be like in our society, doctors, that type of status. And, so just the idea of someone who, keep in mind, this is in a day where there's not public education, the masses could not read or write, and so, someone who was educated had all types of power outside the church and inside the church. And so in the Corinthian area, there's this high sense of I'm the wise one, when it comes to world events or just world knowledge in general. But when you start adding in the dimension of theology, which is a highly talked about subject in Greek culture, someone who could give any aspect of wisdom, they would be seen in a very high light compared to the average. So you got all these things going into this church. And what began were these little camps of, people of leadership vying for power, vying for, teaching, things of that nature. And it's just created this hot mess. That's a nice theological word, isn't it? Of what's going on. And they're fighting. I know that sounds odd that we would fight inside of a church. And it's hurting people. And so maybe as a last-ditch effort, we don't know 100%, but there's a group that writes to Paul that says, please weigh in on this. You're the church founder. Help us understand what's going on. And it's a laundry list of things, and the first one has to do with leadership, and this is where we're at in chapter 2. And so what Paul is starting to do is give a little bit of resetting the baseline of what real wisdom is, where you will see a fair amount of argument, or like if you can imagine scales, this is what you're valuing, or this is what the larger society is valuing as when it comes to wisdom. Let me tell you what God values. And so you're going to start to see a lot of this interplay back and forth in the text. So if somebody would read verse 6 through 16, we'll begin there. Okay?
Yet among the mature we do speak wisdom, though it is not a wisdom of this age, or of the rulers of this age, who are doomed to perish. But we speak God's wisdom, secret and hidden, which God decreed before the ages of our glory. None of the rulers of this age understood this, for if they had, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. But as it is written, what no eye has seen, no ear heard, nor the human heart conceived, what God has prepared for those who love him. These things God has revealed to us through the Spirit, for the Spirit searches everything, even the depths of God. For what human being knows what is truly human, except the human spirit that is within? So also no one comprehends what is truly God's, except the Spirit of God. Now we have received not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit that is from God, so that we may understand the gifts bestowed on us by God. And we speak of these things in words not taught by human wisdom, but taught by the Spirit, interpreting spiritual things to those who are spiritual. Those who are unspiritual do not receive the gifts of God's Spirit, for they are foolishness to them, and they are unable to understand them because they are spiritually discerned. Those who are spiritual discern all things, and they are themselves subject to no one else's scrutiny. For who has known the mind of the Lord so as to instruct him? But we have the mind of Christ.
Okay, thank you. Sort of what's going on is you have this kind of interplay between what's going on compared to the world. The idea of the scale. So you got what the Greek society, or at least the surrounding culture of that time, would value as being wisdom, as compared to what God values. And you see this idea that God is the one who gives wisdom via the Spirit. That's on this side of the ledger, compared to a Greek understanding that is not, according to Paul, designed, where God is the one who gives wisdom. Now, the goal of all of this, and this is kind of what we have to keep in mind too, because this shows up all throughout the text. The goal of all of this is to lead to some level of maturity. And the idea is spiritual maturity. And which carries with it a dynamic that the life of the Christian, the life of the person who follows after God, should be leading to some place. And the idea is that you should become wise, you should become mature in your faith, that there's a level of growth that takes place, and later on we're going to get into what maturity looks like. You're going to see levels of humility. You've heard me talk about this idea of 1 Corinthian principle. Someone might have coined it. If they did, it's somewhere in my subconscious. I'll give credit whenever I can figure it out. I think it's my term, not to give me credit. That's just what I'm calling it. And but the idea is, all things might be lawful for you to do, but all things aren't beneficial, so you don't do it. Does that make sense? And I remember I remember distinctly where it was at. Connor and I were sitting on the couch, and I think he's 5 or 6 years old. But I can replay the image. I was watching TV one day, and he said, "Dad, will I be a man?" And the idea was, well, when you know that you can lay something down, when you can, that's what it means to be an adult. He wasn't talking about being a man, an adult. When you understand the idea that you can do certain things, that sits within the ability to happen, but you don't do it because it's not beneficial. That's maturity. And think about it in your own life. There are a ton of things you can do that I think a lot of times God says, yeah, you could. That is considered holy. That is considered just. That is considered righteous. But you don't do it because it's not beneficial to anybody. You understand what I mean by that? Take Jesus, for instance. Jesus didn't have to do a lot of things. He didn't. Read Philippians 2, 5 through 11. The first part of that chapter 2 says, "Be of the same mind of Christ." And then Paul actually quotes this ancient hymn about Christ, and it's inserted into the text. And it says though he was equal with God, didn't count that equality as something to be exploited, but lowered himself, taking on the form of a human, the form of a slave, even unto death, so that God's name would be glorified, and at the name of Christ, and it just kind of goes on. There are a ton of things that Christ could have done, but he chose not to do. The temptations, and we looked at that in Mark's Gospel. We actually think back to that lesson. Like you can't. I mean, I said, go ahead, pull that up, pull that file up. You know. But we looked at Matthew and we looked at Luke, and how they outline or talk about the temptation stories. You know, turning a rock into bread. Now, is that sinful? No. All right. Pardon me?
Depends on who you are.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, you know, I can't find anything in the Old Testament, which is what Jesus would have been operating out of, that turning a stone into bread was sinful. Jumping off the temple, is that sinful? No. Right. You know, so there's a lot of things Christ could have done, and it'd be okay, but he chose not to do it. Even and right after right before the temptations, what are the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke? What's the story that's recorded, or the part that's recorded before that? It's his baptism. Did Christ have to be baptized? No. But what did he do? He chose to. That's exactly right. So there are a lot of things that might be, you know, that might be lawful, might be good, might be okay. I mean, it doesn't get us. We're not in any jeopardy when it comes to being, you know, unclean to take an Old Testament and New Testament concept, or even sinful to take a biblical concept. There's just some things that we can do, but we choose not to do it because we understand that's not what's most beneficial. And so inside this Corinth church, there's nothing wrong with having spiritual gifts. There's nothing wrong with using your spiritual gift. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be leaders inside the church. I mean, so there's a lot of things that are okay. It's just what they're doing with that that's not beneficial. And so that's where Paul is drawing the line. And the idea for all of us is at some point, what should be happening inside of our faith is this growth process that leads ultimately to what we would call maturity. And for me, as I interpret that, that is to the level that you can lay down your own authority or power for the benefit of somebody else. Right?
Shane, in Proverbs, of course, the Jews were very familiar with wisdom.
Right.
But that's more common sense, I guess, than what you're talking about.
Well, wisdom. I mean, they both use the same word, wisdom.
Yeah.
The idea is, where does it originate from?
From God.
Right. And so even with Paul, I mean, he's saying wisdom comes via God, when Greeks would say wisdom is this thing that's just floating out here, and, you know, only a select few can tap into it. And so the issue is, what's the origin behind it? And where does it ultimately come from? And for Paul, and for even in the Old Testament, for Jewish mindset, Judeo-Christian, both of them agree here, is that it stems first from God. I mean, you actually had what was read about the idea that, you know, it comes from the Spirit. It actually is seen kind of like as a mystery. If you think back to also when we looked at Mark 4, very specifically, is the parable of the sower. And, you know, you got the guy that goes out and he throws the seeds out, and you have the different types of people. Well, in between the giving of the parable and the interpretation of the parable, there are these segments of verses, I think around verse 10-ish, 11, somewhere in that neighborhood, that actually says, to you have been given the secrets. Some of your Bibles say the secrets, some of them say the mysteries of the kingdom of God. That from, and if you think back to our Mark study, got this idea of kingdom again. So those who are inside the kingdom should see the mystery easy. Those outside, it seems like craziness. Why would someone give of their life for someone else? I mean, what's the value of Jesus, who knew no sin, dying for sinful people? I mean, that sounds pretty stupid. Think about it. Would you do it? I'm not talking about dying for your family. That's easy. Okay? I'm talking about dying for the people who are next to you. You might love them enough to, you know, to do that. I'm talking about for Jeffrey Dahmer. No, seriously. That's the plumb line. Not me. not my children, not Brooke, for, who in your mind is the most notorious sinner? Now, you can't say anybody in Columbus, right? So, but what comes to your mind?
Hitler.
Hitler? Okay, keep going. We got Hitler. Stalin. Okay, all right. There's no right or wrong, just list the people, okay?
The man who kidnapped the 3 girls.
So I mean, we make a laundry list of people that, at least from our perspectives, they are the most notorious of individuals. That's who Jesus died for. All right? Now it's easy for us to say, well, Jesus died for us because we're fairly good people. I mean, we can live with that. There's something that makes us feel good about that. One, because we don't want to be in the same category as the most notorious of individuals. So there is a level of judgment that we make that says, I'm not near as bad as that person, so maybe I deserve God's love. But they're horrible people. They really don't deserve it, and they're going to hell anyways. Thank the Lord, I'm not. So, we have this type of delineation we make all the time. The Bible does not make that delineation, by the way. It doesn't. I mean, this is where we remember eisegete and exegete. What's eisegete? Reading into the text what we want it to read.
Right.
We read, I'm good, they're not. And I got all these verses to justify it. The Bible does not ever make that conclusion. For what the Bible talks about, Old and New Testament, if you break just one of the commandments ever, you are guilty of breaking them all the time. All right? It's not easy to swallow. I'm not saying you're going to go home feeling good about it. I mean, I don't like it. I mean, it seems, but my point is that we judge on a scale by our own perceptions. By our own knowledge, by what we know, and it's heavily biased towards ourselves.
Have you ever heard, a family member come out of the court room and say, well, I do forgive them, but that's hard for me to identify with them saying that. Family member of a victim.
Yeah, there's multiple issues that could, that particular example. You have, it could be trying to adequately express. Hang on a second. We're going to stop that. The example is, I forgive, but some of it could be how they're trying to maybe find words to all the emotions that are going on. I mean, it's right after the actual probably verdict has been given, or punishment has. So I understand some of that. I don't know if that is an indication of their understanding of forgiveness. I mean, that's an example that has so many issues that are involved, it's hard to fully impact on where they sit on this or where they don't. Keep in mind, forgiveness, we're still on this particular example, forgiveness is not the same as reconciliation. I mean, it's completely different. Forgiveness has to do with the person and God, all right? Reconciliation has to do with the person and the other person. They're light years difference. Most, this is just, I'm going to make a statement. It's not I don't mean it as a judgmental statement or a negative statement. It's just from observation of being in ministry about 20 years. Most people in the church get those confused. And they think they're one and the same, and they're not. They're not even close to the same. One, forgiveness is the prerequisite for reconciliation, but forgiveness is vertical, has to do with God and the person. Reconciliation is horizontal, has to do with the person and the person. And so, think about it. Let's just we'll say this is Shane. You know, what's the only thing Shane can control? That's exactly right. So the only, of this little triangle, the only person or the only thing that I can control is Shane. And the idea, Hebrews, more so than any other book in the Bible to me, gives the best word to describe bitterness. It says a root of bitterness. And so the idea is that inside the person has allowed something inside of them to determine identity, to determine how they see God and also how they see other people. And so getting this out is an act that God and the person interact in. Getting these two, where there's reconciliation and wholeness back on this relationship, that's completely different. And it might not ever happen, which is okay. Right? I mean, it really is. It's theologically okay because you can't control this person. And in order for, if my little brother's name is Trey, if Trey and I have a broken relationship, the only way we're ever going to be restored is both of us wanting to seek after restoration. If I don't want to, it doesn't matter what he does. If he doesn't want to, it doesn't matter what I do. And so, when we start talking about an example about I forgive, but, it could be a number of things. It could be justification to hate, and they just want to be seen in a positive light. It could be where we practice a great deal. Inside the church, we really do like to practice superficial forgiveness. You know what I mean by that? Superficial forgiveness is, I grew up in Sunday school, all the time, you must forgive, you must forgive, you must forgive. And my dear friend Peggy, who's sitting in on my left, table one, seat one, Peggy does something to hurt me, and because I know that I must forgive, I quickly run up to Peggy and say, Peggy, I forgive you, but deep down I think she's a rat. Okay? Maybe she thinks I'm a rat, okay? And but we do that all the time. And so we're quick to do it. I think I told you that one of my professors, I remember him he was telling a story about his interaction in counseling where someone came to see him, and this is years ago. They described the situation, the event, and then the person asked the professor, should I forgive? And he said, let's consider the question. Think about it for 6 months. We love to go after quick, easy answers in the church. And there's just not always a lot of those. There's not. When you start talking about personal, relationships, how many of your relationships that you would classify have just been easy? Easy. Problem-free. No anxiety involved. How many? Do you got one?
I think this happens when you love that person to the point that you understand their behaviors and can accept it.
Okay, yeah. Well, see, now you're talking about maturity. You're talking about things that might be lawful for you to do, but you lay them down for the benefit of something else. For instance, people who do not understand what you're talking about, Miss Marilyn, are people who quickly in relationships go to rights. You know what I mean by that? It's my right to do this. It's my right to say this. It's my right to have, you're supposed to do this because it's my right to be this way. All right? That is not a mature statement. I hope that's not anybody in here. If it is, we'll have, we can talk about that later if you want. But we do that. It's easy to do it in relationships because there are all kind of things that go into that. You've got, there are some relationships where there's one person who gives more than the other, and it will always be that way. Okay? That's not good, bad. Is it fair? Probably not. If we look at it on the equality scale, but that's your choice to do. It doesn't make the relationship right or wrong. It's just whether or not you want it to be that way. you know, that doesn't mean it's theologically not right, or, you know, how about someone who caregivers for another? That's hard work. You ever been around that? You know, I mean, you know, now, we could talk about who's actually learning the most from that, the person who's receiving the care or the person who's learning how to care. But on a great many levels, it's one-sided. At least in the way we view things, correct? Am I wrong? And so, I mean, you know, so is that equal? By so many means, we would say no. But it's not, you know, if person A is the one who's receiving, and we'll just keep it with physical care, that's the easy one to talk about. If person X is receiving a lot of the physical care, and person Y is the one who's giving all the care, the person who determines whether or not it's valuable is this person. Not me, who's outside, you know, or not you, who's outside the relationship. You know, so it might be perfectly okay for someone to be the lines portion of the one who gives. And if you go talk to this person, do they do the 1 Corinthian principle, lay down what everybody would say is some of their rights? They would say, oh yeah, absolutely, but I'm the one who's gaining from it. It happens all the time. It's a beautiful thing. I don't think it's wrong. That's it. Now, what gets in trouble with relationships is when, you know, when this person thinks they're due it, and this person thinks they shouldn't have to do it. But now they're not on the same page. So that's a completely different issue. Does that make sense? And so, you know, but in order for that to happen, what your point is, if I understand you correctly, and so you tell me if I'm not, if person Y and to some degree person X, there's a great level of maturity in their relationship.
And I call it love too.
Oh, okay, sure. I mean, that's fine. I'm good with that. I'm good with those terms. I mean, a greater maturation in love. They understand it better. I mean, marriage probably was this much. I'm dead serious. I mean, I had no concept of, you know, what, you know, it was very shallow in, you know. And I mean, I hope I've learned more. I'm not the expert on it, but, you know, there aren't any rights in our relationship. I mean, there's not. You know, if you want your relationships to grow, now we're talking about spouses, you can talk about children and whatnot, you just have to give up the concept that there are things that are due they make. Now, we might think that we earn it. You don't earn anything. I mean, what makes somebody love you? Tell me, I want to know. I mean, I'm interested in this. This isn't in the text. We've left it. That's okay.
Giving them love.
Pardon me?
Giving them love.
Sure, but you know, I can love a ton of folks, and whether or not they choose to love me back, whose decision is that? Is it mine? No, it's theirs. They choose to do it, right? I mean, you could love me, and it could be just fantastic, and I could just receive it and say thank you, you know, or I could say, you know what, that's exactly right. You know, I could be a vacuum and suck it all in, or I could try to reciprocate. But that's me. Does that make sense? I mean, you know, she can't control. Love is something. The difference between pagans, this is the biblical word, the pagans and the Christians, is love is a choice the Christian makes. Love is not esoteric where it's just floating around here, you fall in or you fall out. That doesn't happen. Nobody ever falls out of love. They just stop making the choice over time that tells the other person that they matter. I mean, you don't. I mean, you know, you have a question? Okay. But what happens is we just stop making the choice. I'm not saying it's easy. It can be very hurtful. It can fragment all kind of things. But you know, we have a choice. I mean, go back to when we looked at the problem of pain. What does God give people? And gives them freedom. And so you can use what's given to you in a host of different ways. Now we're talking about mainly inside of a family or inside of a marriage or a relationship or whatnot. But let's get broader. Think about the St. Paul for All, right? You know what we just did. what'd you do? You made a choice to do what? To go and love, to go and serve. You didn't have to. You do it. And so, I mean, it's the idea that said, now we might feel compelled, or we might feel, conviction or things of that nature, but all of that is God trying to influence you to mature, to grow in your love or grow in your faith. But it's still a choice you make. I mean, God doesn't rob you of the ability. You're not a pawn on the chessboard. God doesn't rob you of the ability to use what has been given to you in ways that can be beneficial or ways that cannot be. And so the goal of all of this is to lead to a level of what, again, these are my terms, maturation of faith. That how you act naturally is as close to how Jesus acted naturally as well. And so those two images come together, what you find, and this comes out of the text, God through the Holy Spirit, given wisdom, God is interacting, pushing us, or not where, not where it's like we don't have any say in this, but God is influencing us, so eventually we would look like Christ. So until that happens, be thankful when there are things like conviction. Be thankful when there are things like anxiety, when you read a text, or when you use it as a mirror and you lay your life up against someone else. Go back and listen, if you weren't here on Sunday, listen to John or the sermon, my sermon on the Psalm, because the Psalm is an example of what God does in both good events and in bad events of our life that ultimately want to lead us into something that looks like Christ. Now, we're real good at giving God the good events, the easy events. We're not as good in giving God those bad or negative events of our life. Part of that's fear. I mean, who wants to embrace the parts that, my grandmother she drilled this into my head. Shane, God doesn't like ugly. I heard that a million times. Well, I know inside of Shane there are some ugly parts, okay? Who wants to give the ugly parts to God? Now, we don't mind giving it to God that says, oh yeah, forgive me. I want a clean slate, but don't let me deal with it. I mean, it's kind of like, are you mad that you did it? Are you mad that you got caught? Most of us are mad or sad, or put whatever adjective you want there, that we got caught. Oh God, please forgive me of this. Wipe me clean so I can have a clean slate. Just don't let me go and analyze it. The truth is I already know. I just want to deny it. Is that fair? Or is that close to home for people outside of St. Paul? Right? We got some First Baptists and some others. Whatever church you're from, if you're not St. Paul, shout it out. We'll put that in the list too. All right. But you see that's the goal is from the psalmist, the psalm that we looked at this past Sunday, and even inside the text today, is God is working inside of all of us to lead us to the point to where on the inside first, we look like Christ. Because if you get the inside right, the outside will follow. It is not the other way around. Transformation isn't from the outside in. That's the whole problem in the Old Testament. I can do what I need to do on the outside, get all my commandments right, and then I'll get up the ladder of holiness, and sooner or later I'm going to be real close to God. The problem is we never can get it all right on the outside if the inside is not right first. Transformation takes place from the inside out, not from the outside in. That doesn't mean that we neglect the outside. I mean, as this is being purified, it gets played out on the outside. Correct? Go back to the relationships. I mean, I might choose. We're going to take a break in just a second. I might choose to want to love Brooke so that my inside hopefully is getting right. But how that plays out might look different. So, I do things on the outside. But I can do things on the outside and they be good and my inside be horrible, correct? That happens all the time too. Transformation for the believer happens from the inside out, not the outside in. All right, any questions on that? This is a good place to take a break. All right, take 15 minutes for how God, this is what we talked about just before the break, how God is working to influence the person into something that looks like the image of Christ. And so he invites them to reflect on their own life. Go back and look at your own life, see see part of the transformative process that God has done inside of you. And all of it is pointing to the idea of where does wisdom sit? It sits with God, not from some outside source. So that's chapter 2 is it's an easier of the chapters to look at, to study. Before we get into a couple other things about chapter 2, I want to talk real quick about early Methodism to some degree, but it's not, I think Methodism claimed it, but this was happening long before John Wesley. John Wesley just sort of made it famous more than anything else. But it's a very what they did in early Methodist thought, and you see this, you could make the case in Acts too. So it's not, again, it was long before John Wesley, but he just put a structure to it. Are y'all familiar with where the term Methodist comes from? I mean, it actually was not it wasn't a nice name. I mean, it was kind of a derogatory, it was a derogatory name. I mean, Wesley, the thought came from this whole maturation process. They didn't use maturation. What they said was, how does someone become holy in heart and life? So you have the idea of inside and outside holiness. And Wesley was a very structured individual, and there was a group of about 6, maybe 8 folks with him. They started something called a Holy Club, and he's over in Oxford, England. And the idea was they began to look at their life and what was going on inside their heart, and also what some of the actions they committed. And then when they lay it up against the scriptures, they realized that there were a great deal of things that just weren't what they would call holy. So the idea was we need a plan. We need to have a good plan on how we can become holy, to use our term from this morning, how we can mature in our faith. And so they created this idea of class meetings, or where you would, basically, the idea is almost like a seeker service. Have you heard that concept before? Seeker service came out of Willow Creek, outside of Chicago. Saddleback, you've heard of Rick Warren? Okay. The idea is that we want to create a worship service that makes it easy for unchurched people to come to. And so, we might, it might be, not what we would call classical hymns. It might be singing U2, something like that. I mean, the idea is to find something that's, Luther was, anybody formed the Lutheran tradition? You've heard me talk about Mighty Fortress is Our God. You like that song? You know what the music is to?
A beer hymn.
A beer song. The drinking song. So a pub song. And so what, so this Rick Warren and what's the word? Bill Hybels were not the first people to come up with this. This was long predates them. But the idea was we want to make it easy for people to understand things about God, understand God's love, care, and so they find something in society, and then a means or an avenue, and then the church basically takes it over. And we do that all the time. That's not something we do. But Wesley was doing the same thing. They would go out into bars, into wherever, and they would preach, teach. They would teach songs, whatnot. And the idea was we want to be a connecting piece from the church to the world, because it was very difficult in that time for people to break into the church culture. And so They would go out into all these places, and it's not just a Methodist thing. There were Baptists and other, what would be other denominations doing this as well. But the idea was to get them from out here, say outside in wherever, inside, and so they would then put them in class meetings. And so the only prerequisite for you to go to a class meeting was they had one question: do you want to flee the wrath to come? And if you answered yes, welcome aboard. I mean, that's the only question that got you to come into the class meeting was, to say it a different way, do you not want to go to hell? And if someone said, well, yeah, I like that, then guess what? You could be in a class meeting. And the class meeting would meet strictly just to pray for needs, similar to this group, to study Scripture, and then they had to give a penny. And the penny went to help children, and very specific in where it went to help. And that was really it. Now you had a class leader, and you normally had like an assistant class leader, but the idea was to create a structure by which somebody who might be on the outside could easily come to the inside and eventually lead into something that would be some level of maturation of faith. For those who wanted to go deeper inside the class meeting, they came up with what they call bands. And those were more of what we would probably call accountability groups, discipleship groups. And this is what's interesting to me. This was, to use my son's lingo, this was hardcore. I mean, you got no breaks in the bands. You got a lot of breaks up here. It's just one question, remember? Do you want to go to heaven or hell? All right, answer. Which one? Heaven, right? We're all in the class meeting, right? Now, once you get there, the next one is, if I want to, I realize that there are things inside of me that need to change. So I'm going to go into a smaller group, maybe a class meeting might have 50 people, so we might break that into 5 different groups that we would call a band. They might have another name, but history is called bands. But I want you to listen to some of the questions that they would ask themselves. So you can imagine Peggy will be our leader, and so Peggy would go to the podium and would say, okay, everybody in the band, what sins have you committed since we last met? Wow. Yeah, I know it. That's my pet peeve. And then you would have time of confession, right? Now, on one level, that sounds, why would you do that? What is the benefit of confessing your sins? Seriously, right? I mean, well, forgiveness, yeah, accountability.
Can you release it?
Yeah, so there's all kind of, but amongst your peers, next week, and we're not going to be here, so just pretend we're going to be here. Instead of teaching, we're just all going to stand up and confess our sins one right after the other. Okay?
I'm going to be absent.
Sal be absent? Yeah, we're not going to be here. So, but on a practical level, what do you think will happen the next time you came? Exactly right. She said there wouldn't be any sins. I mean, seriously. I mean, that is a practical application to the whole concept of accountability. If I really do have to tell my trusted friends what's going on inside of me, it won't take but about one time, right? Maybe 2. There'll at least be a change of behavior. Would it not be? Seriously. I mean, if you had to stand up and say, yeah, this is what I did, and then the next time it's right, change your time, I can guarantee you I won't do that again. I mean, so there's a practical aspect. There's a lot of theological that we talked about, the idea of, there is accountability, there's something that really does take place when you do confess, even if it is to God. I'm not necessarily advocating you to go home and confess to the garden club or whatever club that you might be in, or your social club or your bowling group or whatever. Be careful. Don't cast your pearls before swine. There may be someone that you know very, very well. But when you out yourself, for lack of better words, that does make a big difference when the next time. That I promise you. So there was an idea. Again, these are very small groups, trust group, but one of the questions they asked were, what sins have you committed since last time? The next one was a little bit different. What temptations do you have? You know, maybe not have committed an action, but what's out there on the radar screen that's just kind of looking real good? And then, now here, they were also asked, in these temptations, how have you been delivered? How have you seen the hand of God working in your life in such a way where God is moving you towards something that looks like Christ? And then they asked this question, do you have any secrets? That's interesting. Let me reinterpret this. Are you lying? Now think about this. If class meetings open to everybody, this isn't open to everybody. And the idea wasn't that you become superhero status when you move here. No, that's not it. This is something that's self-selected, self-directed, where you want to move towards this image of Christ. So you orchestrate your life around things that are going on inside your heart and how that plays out into behavior, because what you desire is to be like Christ. So it's not like, don't interpret this to be someone is inflicting this on other people. These are people who want to change. And so and one of the other questions was, do you have anything in your life that might be perceived as questionable? Now, the reason why I tell you this is not because next week we're going to stand up and do this, all right? But what if you took this home with you where you asked yourself these things? Right? We're not airing it. We're not talking about anybody else. But what just between you and God? All right? Now the idea is that we want to grow in holiness of heart and life. So we want our inside and our outside to be something that really does look like Christ. This really is good stuff. I mean, if you sit with this for 6 months, I promise you, it'll make a difference.
You know, earlier when you said that the relationship would go up to God, so if you're by yourself, it's you and God. Versus if you're in a band,
right,
you're working this way.
Sure.
People trying to make yourself holy rather than let the Holy
Right.
Spirit.
Right. And they would, Wesley, I'm giving you a real thumbnail. Wesley would argue you need both of them to some degree. There is something to a trusted accountability partner. Particularly around this issue, if you really do have temptations, that's why AA works so well. Right? You got a mentor, you got a sponsor, you got someone who knows what it's like, who walks with you, and they're a safety net. They're the phone a friend. Right? I'm in trouble. I need you to, will you sit with me? Will you talk with me? Will you go with me? Will you help me not do something because I know on the horizon there is a temptation here for me, and I need your help. There's a...
And don't they pray for each other?
Sure, yeah, absolutely,
That's part
yeah.
of the, I've been in an accountability group in the past when I had something I really, and we had about half a dozen of us, the age range was very wide.
Right.
And each of us had a totally different problem within, and it worked.
It does. This really does work. Now we were talking about it in terms, which is why I don't want us to perceive this as being forced upon something. Accountability groups or discipleship groups or whatnot, what makes them work is that people want to be there.
They need it.
Right.
We need it.
Yeah, exactly right. And everybody, there's accountability, there's confidentiality. All right, so this is for everybody. And whether or not somebody wants to be here or not is not an indication of whether or not they're spiritual or not either. So don't. This isn't a judgment statement of who passes and who does not. Okay, and because sometimes this is seasonal. There might be a season in your life that you realize that I'm struggling here, and can I? You do this to some degree naturally. Can we go to lunch? Now, is that always, whenever you hear that, is that always an invitation just to go and eat? No, not even close to that. We go to dinner. Normally, there's something behind that. There's a reason. So, I mean, we do this to some degree. I'm just giving you some historical, larger perspective from different denominations of how they tackle this as a denomination or as a large group around the concept of structure. But the questions are good, even for just an individual, not to share, or if you have one or two trusted friends that you really can be this honest, good on you. Go home and give thanks to God. Not everybody has this. And I'm real serious on that one. There are a ton of folks inside the church that would love to have a friend so close that they could share this, right?
It's wonderful to live
Yeah,
with
I
a
mean,
sister.
yeah, there's commonality. Yeah, absolutely. But not everybody has it, and it can be your spouse if you have a spouse. I mean, it can be. But you've got a lot of boundary issues there. Most time it needs to be same-sex related. Someone who has the same issues that you got, right? And doesn't have to be age. Age is not an indication, but statistically, and there's all kind of data on this. Same gender and both self-selected and self-directed. That is crucial, which means you want to be there and you gladly put skin in the game. All right? But this is pretty serious. I mean, think about it. If you were to have even your own prayer life, right? What if you were to structure your prayer life around the idea of, all right, God, I'm going to do some reflection around myself. When I look at this past week, or yesterday, or the last time since I prayed, or whatever, I know I've done some things that started in the heart and got played out in my actions. I'm not proud of them, but I'm confessing to you. All right, but just think about that. That takes a lot of. I mean, you're kind of level bare before God, right? And then to even say, I want to be smart enough so that I can recognize temptation when it comes. Now, you pray that in the Lord's Prayer every Sunday morning. Lead us not into what?
Temptation.
All right, which means I hadn't done it yet. I hadn't committed it. That's exactly right. But I want to see it on the horizon. You ever watch the front move in? Where you go to the beach? Y'all going to the beach next week? Oh, yeah. Perfect. All right. So you see the storm coming in. You see it way out over the ocean. And you just watch it, the darkness kind of come in. That's what you want to do. Help me recognize temptation for what it is. There's a word in the book of James that makes me want to think that James was a good, I'm going to say, I guess you can fish in the north, but, fishing down here is pretty big, with lakes and ponds and whatnot. So maybe James was a good southerner. And he talks about this idea of the equivalent of like a fishing lure. Now, they don't have a word in the Greek for fishing lure, but if we're translating into English, that's what we're going to use. You ever see those commercials? You probably haven't because they're boring as all get out. Are those shows where, fishing shows, where they're trying to sell you on a new lure, and they got a camera under the water, and they throw it in, and you see the little thing bobbing up and down, and you see the fish come and grab it? I always want to go, stage it, right? But the idea is they see the lure, and it looks so good that they can't control themselves, and so they go and bite it. Right? That's the image in James when it comes to temptation. Where have I recognized that something just looks real good? And I might see the little hooks on the bottom, but I don't really care if it just looks really nice. Can you recognize that? Sometimes that might be, we were talking earlier about people and relationships. Can you recognize things in your relationships? In a good way, if you don't know, if you feel like you don't have a clue, pay attention to what happens physically. I mean, you have to be perceptive when you get around certain people. Does your blood pressure go up? Do you get anxiety? Do you dread seeing these people? All right, that's probably means something there. Okay, it might not be all on you, but if in a heightened situation, I'm probably more. I mean, it's more likely that I'm probably going to do something that I'm going to regret. So Pay attention. Where do you see those temptations coming? I'll give you another one. This is me personally, not talking about anybody in here. Do you eat when you are full of anxiety? Did that ever happen? Okay. We didn't ask for hands. I'm just talking about myself, right? That's a tell, right? I'm a stress eater, right? And so there are periods of the church year that I get thinner, and there are periods I get fatter, right? And so I don't have the solution, but I at least can recognize it. And, but that's a tell, right? And then you can take food out, you can put drink, you can put whatever. I mean, just anything. Is there a cue that I mean, is there something that takes place that is more than normal because of a certain situation? If that happens, pay attention to that. That normally is an indication of something that either you are not or I'm not aware of, or where we're practicing just good, honest denial. Right? And what happens is your body just acts it out normally. Recognize it. See it for what it is. And then also, when we get to later on in 1 Corinthians, there's a part that says, I think it's in chapter 10, that describes that whenever temptation comes, God is faithful to give a way out. That word there is an image in the Greek that is the idea of like if you're up on a mountain and you need to get through the mountain instead of going over it, you can find the secret pass, the mountain pass. That's the image. That if you look, anger, we preached on anger a few weeks ago. Anger is a perfect example of this. Most of the time, if you can slow down the process of what's happening so fast, inside of your brain, slow down for a minute, you can see the solution. You know what I mean by that? You following? And so, and the idea is, learn to recognize that in your own life. Go back to AA. One of the things that they teach in AA is that once you recognize the temptation for what it is, it might be that you need an accountability buddy to help you see the pathway out. But all that is teaching. It's teaching us to see where God is working inside of our life and trying to mold us, that when we don't have a concept of what really is at stake, and we're just blowing through this left and right, we're not even paying attention to what's going on, we miss so often what God is trying to do. I mean, for instance, what happens when you see a yellow light when you're driving? Feet on the gas, right? Now, seriously, think about this. What do you do naturally so quick when you see the yellow light? Think about it. Slow down for a minute. You immediately look. Well, you do go through it, or some of the time we go through it. But what are you doing so quickly? You're immediately looking left, right. So you've analyzed the entire intersection in less than a second. Have you not? Okay. Same thing. Slow down. I mean, the light is the cue that says, "Oh my gosh, I either got to stop or go fast." And if I go fast, I definitely got to pay attention to my surroundings. Now, we're not advocating going fast, but we are advocating pay attention to your surroundings. See how God has delivered you. Maybe the last 10 times you were faced with, sad temptation. Maybe we didn't do well 9 of the times, but we did do well 1 of the times. Well, what did we do right there? How do we see God's hand of deliverance and pay attention to that? If you know that the anxiety or whatnot is around a certain person, where there is maybe a broken relationship, I need to write something down. Where there is a broken relationship, say person A, person B, and there's a broken relationship, not every interaction is going to be bad. Now, we remember the bad ones more than we remember the good ones, right? That's just how we're conditioned. Pay attention to where it wasn't bad. Maybe there was a Christmas that it didn't end in shouts. Okay, what happened? They didn't come? Okay, well, that's fine. But seriously, what happened? Maybe there was a time where everybody played nice. Well, what happened? What was going on inside of my life, their life, that where we can coexist. We don't necessarily have a solution, but we want to be smart enough to be self-reflective and figure out what's our end in all this. You won't keep a secret. I mean, it's kind of illogical when you think about it, but we do it. I mean, it reminds me, and I laugh at myself even when I do it. It reminds me of when Connor and Caroline, they're getting better at hiding it now, but when they were little and you knew they did something wrong, come on now, I know what you did. No. We do the same thing with God. What would it look like if we just said, you know what? Yeah, this is me. I mean, to admit that. What happens is we think that if we admit it, everything's going to crumble. Actually, it's the opposite. I mean, it's real freeing to just say, God, this is a struggle for me. And I cannot overcome this. And it drives me crazy. I want to, or maybe there are times even I don't. Maybe there's time I'm angry and I'm still processing all this. And I know until this stuff is processed, if I'm in an environment, I want to act out. So, save me from the time of trial. Help me to be smart enough, at least the things that I can control, to not put myself in that situation. And those things that I can't, would you be with me? Somehow help me not get into this situation until I can process it. Now I'll be faithful. I'm not looking for an excuse, but I'll be faithful to work on my end. But until then, I need your help. Does that make sense? I mean, if that actually is, I'll just speak personally, my own personal experience, that is a way that leads to wholeness. There is no holiness without honesty. There never, ever, ever, ever will be. If you can't be honest with yourself, and honest with God, there's no way in the world we ever lead into a holy life. It just will not happen. This is just kind of another question that's already been asked. Ask yourself, where are those some things, kind of like this temptation that, I know it's just kind of out there, and I don't trust myself in my own strength enough, God, that without your help to do it right. That make sense? So I either need you to continue to purify my heart, or I need you until my heart is purified. I mean, this is graduating to the deep end of the pool. But it works. It does. And what you'll discover is that you will then see things about your life that looks just like Christ. And it's one of those things that there's two ways you can perceive it. Now, this is just from my own reflection. One of them are those times where you see in yourself, it's like you're looking at yourself third person, and you literally see yourself changing. All right? It's kind of like when you look at when your children are very small, and you can see them processing, well, if I sit up, I'm not going to fall. And it literally happens right there in front of you. Remember those times? Or learning to walk, or letting go, when they hold themselves up on the coffee table and they're scared to do anything, and they finally let go and they realize, hey, the ground didn't fall. And of course you're watching it in real time, and there's a level of just, it just clicked. Okay? That'll happen. You'll see it. Now, it doesn't happen often, just like you didn't see every single day that happening inside of children or whatnot. But there are those times that it happens. Pay attention to that. But there's something else where you'll wake up one day, and the way I heard someone describe it, she did the most excellent job in this. She said, she called something her old coat. And she said, I would always want to grab this old coat. And she said, I don't know when it took place. Just one day when I went to the closet, I didn't want to grab the coat anymore. So she didn't see the little small increment by increment by increment of transformation taking place. But she saw that one day, she just realized that, you know what? This isn't as big of a struggle as what it once was. All right? Does that make sense? Now, where I'm getting at is, it does take our proactiveness. Right? You don't just wake up one day and it's all fixed. Now, there's a big dose of God that helps in this. But what's required, remember, you got freedom, you got power. How do you choose to use it? Do you choose to use it? Not easy. But do you choose to use it in a way that allows God to work inside? There's something to this whole band stuff. Now, there are other denominations that have done it. There, you go back and look in the book of Acts. You can see it all throughout the church's history. So it's not just a Methodist thing. I'm just giving you Methodist terminology to describe something that is thoroughly Orthodox Christian. But it does work. What's required, really, is courage. I'm convinced of this. I think I said it with Lent. Then we're going to close. The process of Lent, or the period of Lent, is not for the faint of heart. Now, you can get bigger than that and say the Christian walk is not for the faint of heart. Because what is required, not asked, what is required for people who live inside of God's kingdom is to grow, is to mature in their faith. Now, God does so much in that process, by far the lion's portion. But what's required of us is something like this. It might not be these questions, these terms, or whatnot, but what is required is that the time. This is. I'm going to have to remember this. Someone tell me about this so I can write it down. The only time in the New Testament when it gives this picture of like being in a football stadium or stand is when he talks about Hebrews, and it talks about surrounding by a great cloud of witnesses. Who are the people who are sitting and watching? If you know the text. The saints, which means what is happening? They've got it, and they're also what?
They're helping.
Keep going. How do you become a saint in the Hebrew text? You die.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, you see what I'm saying? And so, the people, now in our terms of death and living, okay? I mean, the Bible, it doesn't use, the words for death and life are different than the way we use it. So I'm using our understanding of life and death. The people who have died, because in that laundry list of saints, they've all physically died. You got Abraham, the long laundry list of folks. Now, it's an open-ended list that says, guess what? You could be a part of this too. But the ones who have left the field, this imagery in Hebrews, who've left the field and who sit are the ones who have died. So if you're not dead, you don't sit. Which means what? You play. You're in the game. Which means you're active. Which means what? One of my favorite sayings is, "It is what it is." I mean, but it's not a bad thing. It's a great thing. I mean, God does not quit in wanting to form Christ inside of you. But there are some things required of us. All right? Go in peace. May the Lord bless you.
Yeah, no. And so